Good morning, everyone. Let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Donovan Brown. I'm a senior program manager here at Microsoft responsible for DevOps, which I am responsible for TFS, or the long version is Team Foundation Server, or VSTS, which long version is Visual Studio Team Services. And I am really excited today because I have my buddy David Tesar here. So David, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a senior technical evangelist at Microsoft focused on DevOps. So I'm in the DX team, which is a little different than you, but we both have the common shared love of DevOps.
Exactly.
Right?
What's funny is I used to be in DX.
Yeah.
I was in DS as a TSP, and so I know what it means to be in DX and be in the field and trying to get our message out, and I really do appreciate it. And I think we complement each other really well. It's funny that we saw that one that tweet where the guy said we're like the lethal weapon of DevOps.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
It was awesome.
It was
because
good.
With 20 years of development, and you almost have the same amount of years in infrastructure, it's really nice for us to keep each other balanced, right?
Right.
So we don't go too far one way or the other way.
That's right.
And what I'm hoping for today is an education on infrastructure as code and configuration as code, because he's the man when it comes to that, and I really wanted to get your opinion, and I wanted to demystify some of the acronyms and when is what, because I've asked that question a couple times, like, okay, do you consider infrastructure as code and config as code as the same thing? I do not, and I'm curious on. I think you and I agree.
Do you want to start in on that, or
I do. So let's go ahead and let's look at a definition of what infrastructure as code is.
Sure.
Let's talk to that.
So I'll just read what it says here, and then have a discussion. So it says this is a Forrester white paper. If you just search up Forrester Infrastructure as Code white paper, it's a free download. We did a study with Forrester, surveying a bunch of people on the impact of infrastructure as code. But in this, we defined infrastructure as code as a strategy in which the techniques, processes, and tool sets used in software development are leveraged to manage the deployment and configuration of systems, applications, and middleware. Now, to be fair, so before we started this, there was a challenge, and this is a hard thing in the industry now, which is that there's not a standard agreed upon definition, here's what infrastructure as code or even config as code means.
Correct.
And I've had a lot of these conversations out there on this topic.
Sure.
So the first thing we found was like there's way more people apparently searching for infrastructure as code than config as code. so there's that.
That's interesting.
But also you'll notice in that definition that was there, it does talk about configuration.
I saw that. I heard that. And I was like, to me, that kind of blurs the lines a lot.
Right. And so I think, at least for me, I think when I think about infrastructure as code, I kind of just assume that the configuration is all there, that needs to be there, right? So you could create, let's say, a piece of code that goes and just pushes a VM that does nothing.
Right.
And has no configuration, but the VM pops up.
And that is infrastructure as code is my purest.
And that its purest, most simplest form. You could try and argue that. I would say, though, I would almost go a step further in that, if you think about why are you doing this, right? Why are you doing this spin up a VM?
Sure.
It's likely to service developers or somebody else who has a use to use that particular piece of infrastructure.
Agreed.
So therefore, you're going to likely need to do some form of configuration of that infrastructure.
No argument.
Right?
No argument. But to me, those are two different phases of an end goal.
Right.
Right. Step one is spin up the environment. Step two is configure it. So infrastructure as code, config as code, together are the solution.
Yeah. And
that's why I wanted you here, because I still wanted to hear.
That's right, man. So I mean, I think so. I haven't even been using config as code personally in talking, because I just say infrastructure as code because I just say, look, if you're provisioning infrastructure as code, I expect you to have the configuration necessary to host the application or provide that service as an ops person to whoever it is that you need to be there.
Fair enough.
Right?
Fair enough.
So infrastructure as code, just assume it's there. If you're doing infrastructure as code in, as we talked about, the most simplest basic form of the world, it's minimally useful, right?
Agreed. And I think the reason that I split hairs there is because I can do configuration as code without infrastructure as code, because I could do it against physical machines.
Right.
So if I have a physical Windows machine or a Linux machine, I can run a DSC script or a chef recipe, and it has absolutely nothing to do with infrastructure as code.
And it makes sense, right?
Right.
And I think in the VM case is a particular one where it becomes where it makes sense, right? So,
absolutely.
So like if you provision there's a lot of ways you can do infrastructure as code, right? But if you, at least in the example of Azure and Azure deployment templates, if you're provisioning a PaaS service like an Azure website, for instance, you do the configuration of that service in the template itself.
Agreed.
And after that, you're really done.
Right.
And but with VMs, it's a little different.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And with VMs, you obviously, at least again, continuing on with the Azure deployment template example, you can specify, let's say, a PowerShell script or a
DSC script.
DSC script or other things to try and configure that VM, and that would then kind of complete that piece.
Exactly.
But I fully hear you there on
there's
still, at least especially for VMs, there's a possibility where you could do configuration in code without actually having the infrastructure being deployed. So for instance, right, a PowerShell DSC script. Just because you have a PowerShell DSC script doesn't mean you're now doing infrastructure as code, because you're not going from no infrastructure to that.
Exactly.
So I understand. I think.
But I might be splitting hairs too. I might be getting too fine-grained to where it doesn't really benefit anyone to know the differences.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think it's fair, right? I think config as code, I don't have a problem with it per se. I just think that I tend to gravitate towards infrastructure as code because I feel like it kind of encompasses both usually.
I think so too.
And often when I find, config as code, you could go on its most simplest term, like I added a registry setting and now I've got config as code, and it's kind of like, well, you did,
but I got you. I got you. But
So,
then I say again, the whole thing was I learned configuration as code first.
Yeah.
So I learned DSC, and I was doing it against physical machines. So to
Yeah.
me, config as code was its own separate thing.
Yeah.
And also, I have another question. So is infrastructure as code? Does that imply that I'm doing virtual environments? It must, right?
Not necessarily, right?
So how do I stand up a physical hardware with a script?
Yeah, it's possible that you could provision like a spinning piece of metal and get it installed, right? That's possible. I mean, that's been in the ops world for a long time with System Center and things like that. Okay, but I would say in the world in which we live, right? We're 2016. If you're not doing virtualization, containerization, cloud services, something like what's your problem, right? Like you're sitting here and provision bare metal, like who are you? Like I don't know, like right?
Infrastructure as code is not for you.
Right.
That's the question. If you're still there, right?
Yeah. Well, and certainly like I'm sure that there's use cases, especially things like IoT and all that. But the main thing is with the concept of infrastructure as code is that you go from nothing to everything that's needed to provide that service.
Agreed.
Whether that service being the app that you're working on or even development VMs for all that I care, right?
Sure.
If it's, hey, I want to spin up dev VMs in Azure for devs to develop on, fine. You've done everything you need to get that ready to go. Right?
Got it.
Yep.
Okay, good. So I think we're in agreement, and I think again I because I learned the config as code first, I always keep them separate in my mind as two separate steps.
I think it's also important because I know we're talking about infrastructure code. I think it's also important because another one that people get confused with is configuration management.
Right. We talked about this a little bit yesterday.
Yeah. And so let's just go with that term, the config as code. Okay. Assuming you have that, continuing on with our example of PowerShell DSC script, you apply that PowerShell DSC script and do nothing else to that box, sure, that box will have been configured the way it is, but let's say something changes 5 minutes, 30 minutes later. You now no longer know that necessarily is going to be the case.
Well, that's
right?
not necessarily true, right? Because DSC has the configuration monitor where every 15 minutes it will wake up and reapply that DSC to it.
Yeah, so there's I
think it's what it's called.
Well, yeah, so okay, let's put it this way.
And I can change the timeout.
Yeah. So you can change things for it to apply by itself.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. But in terms of if something changes, like let's say somebody's hacking that virtual machine.
Okay.
Right, or that VM. Knowing it, is it changing every 5 minutes, and that might be an indication of something I need to know about.
Sure.
Or I have 1,000 nodes and I need that DSC configuration to be updated. Right. I need to make a slight change. How do I go and do that? How do I put it under management? Outside of managing itself.
You're not talking about the low-level technology, because I would do a pool server to answer your second question.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. So once you go pool server,
yeah.
Or we have the Azure Automation DSC service,
right,
would be our service answer to the pool server.
If you're in the cloud, yeah.
If you're in the cloud, right? Then now you're doing, I would argue, config.
Okay,
right?
fair enough.
That is separate than the code itself.
Exactly. I think configuration as code is a tool that is used to implement configuration management.
Yes, that's
Okay,
right.
that's how I say it. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind
yeah.
of like that foundation that's there before you go to configuration, a full configuration management DevOps practice, right, which is there. You got to have that piece there, because otherwise you can't enforce something that you don't have defined in code.
Sure, sure.
Right?
So let's talk about this too. So being a Microsoft guy, when I think of infrastructure as code, I immediately think of Azure templates, right? But what other tools are in the industry for doing infrastructure as code?
Sure. Well, I'd say the most prominent, suite of DevOps tools that people are familiar with would be like Puppet, Chef, Salt, and Ansible.
Okay, so
those are all ones that come to mind.
For sure. And the funny thing is that, again, learning DSC compare DSC, Chef, and Puppet to almost be like in the same line of business as configuration as code, right? Again, I got to remember this angle that I'm coming from. But not infrastructure as code. Because the cool thing about ARM templates is that nothing has to exist first. There's no proxy server. Right. I just give it to Azure and then boom. But for Chef, there has to be a node provisioned somewhere that's going to run that recipe, right?
No. So all of those 4 players that I mentioned, I mean, there's other ways you can do it, but I just listed those as kind of the major ones people think about. But all of them have some form of provisioning driver.
Okay.
And
that
all
requires
of them,
no installation anywhere.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, other than their client, just like Azure, you have to have the Azure PowerShell or the XPlot CLI. So there's a client-based tool that all of them have that allows you to have a provisioning connection.
Because when I create my Chef my workstation, that has enough on it to be able to run any cookbooks I want, and then it could go up against Azure and do it. I gotcha.
So in fact, today, earlier today,
I know you had.
I was with Chef at the Automate to Migrate, and one of the things that Andre did was he used the kitchen, the Chef kitchen driver, which actually connects to Azure RM, and we went from nothing to our Parts Unlimited MRP application in, it was like minutes in Azure.
Awesome.
Right, and it was just right there from his laptop and done.
Yeah, I'll link to the description in here that video because I actually want to watch it too. So that sounds fun.
Yeah. So, but there's a lot of different ways, right? And that's one of the reasons why I think this DevOps practice thing is a super important thing, because there's so many different ways that you can enable these concepts, right? So and it doesn't matter exactly how you do it, but as long as you build that muscle up and have the dev and the ops collaboration. I love the fact that that our practice slides happen to look like you and I. It's kind of fun that way.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's good. And now we just find it here, but it didn't really talk about. I guess we're talking more about configuration management again, where source control is not mentioned because that's where you have to store your code, right? You need a tool to actually execute that script as well. There's more to it.
Yeah. So this definition, I mean, I think it's good. I think it still just was hard, right?
It's just like DevOps.
It's hard, yeah. It's hard to get into an exact sentence, but I mean, I think that there's surrounding things around the infrastructure as code, right? Because in its pure form, let's say, you have a piece of code that provisions the infrastructure from nothing, configures it, and it's ready to go.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Now, can you do infrastructure as code without automating the full suite of that? Sure. Can you? Do you have to have all the surrounding thing? Do you have to check that into version control? Not necessarily. However, of course, those are best practices.
Sure.
Of course, you want to check your infrastructure as code in with your application that is relevant. That's like, if you're not doing that, why? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But you don't have to do that best practice to have infrastructure as code or do that practice. It's just like a pairing as I look at it. And the same thing with automation. It's like, well, now that you have this power, why aren't you automating it as a part of your deployment pipeline, right? Like, it's kind of like a no-brainer type of thing, right?
So let's talk about it as the maturity level of an organization. This came up yesterday in the Chalk Talk that you and I had. It was really interesting. Is that the guy said, well, if I don't have all of this, then I can't do DevOps. And you and I both said, no, that's not true. You can do DevOps without infrastructure as code.
Absolutely.
Where do you think infrastructure as code enters on the maturity level of an organization? On time 0, I don't think you go in preaching you have to do infrastructure as code, right?
No.
Where do you think that plays into the scenario?
I mean, obviously the answer is that it depends on the company, right?
For sure.
And so I think things like doing, value stream mapping exercises to determine where's the biggest pain point in your delivering value to your customers, right? That may be infrastructure as code. It may not be. Right? I mean, it really depends, right?
So you're saying in the right customer, it actually might be the first thing we go and do.
It might be, yeah. Like I've been to customers and their development process and their ops people are severely slowed down in the overall value, stream to their customers for delivering their software by spinning up of environments,
Gotcha.
right? Or there's a lot of different things that infrastructure as code plays into, right? For instance, tons and tons of errors between environments, like dev to QA to stage or prod are all so different that it's really hard to have any reliability in. They spend inordinate amount of time each time they try and take that build to the next environment because the environments are like fragile, not sure, things are different, and they spend all this time on it, right? So it might be the first thing, but for some customers, they may have not that same kind of issue. It's a very simple infrastructure, and it's well understood, and it's not the biggest pain point.
Gotcha.
So it really depends. Right?
No, I see huge value. I mean, because I remember when we first met, it was almost like I almost gave off the vibe that I just didn't think it was important. And I was just thinking, I don't think it's the first thing, but not that I don't think it's important, because I've had people go into a machine and change something as simple as a port setting and bring an entire system down. Right. And now it's a needle in a haystack. I'm like, holy crap. Like, I have no idea. We're going to spend hours trying to realize that some guy closed a port on a firewall. Right? Whereas if I had infrastructure as code that defined what must be true, I just rerun that again. And all of a sudden my machines are back up, the app is back up, and then I got to go kill that guy later. But at least I don't have to go hunt and figure out what in the world changed in that environment.
Right. The other thing too is, I mean, like for instance, companies that are really looking to change their architecture, they may be on doing IaaS or even just VMs, and they want to move to more PaaS and other types of cloud services. Like if they don't have infrastructure as code for what they have, it also becomes really hard to try and make innovations, I would say, for that. And so having that the infrastructure as code in place can really provide a foundation for the developers and or ops people to make changes to the infrastructure in a evolving exploratory type of way, right? So for instance, I have maybe I keep my VM for my SQL there, right? Let's say everything right now is VMs. Right?
Sure.
I want to move to my front end in Azure Web Apps.
Okay.
And I've got right now, let's say, a SQL box on a VM and an IIS box on a VM. Well, a logical step would say that let's migrate that IIS to Azure PaaS, Azure Web Apps. And so in that case, if I had all of that defining code, people could start to explore and say, well, why don't I just keep trying to mess with the Azure Web App in code, and I can spin up a new SQL dummy instance and my IS thing in no time. That gets a lot of experimentation and ideas flowing for things. So that's a kind of a different angle, as opposed to a pain point and more of an enabler that sometimes people don't think about.
I also think infrastructure as code is huge at mitigating risk in the fact that there's that one guy in your organization that knows all the right buttons to click to configure the server. And if he's on vacation, there's no provisioning another server, right? Because he's the only guy who knows what settings to set. But when those settings are in code, whoever wants to go on vacation can, and I run a tool that goes and stands up another instance for me. Because I know people who have been that guy and like being that guy and hold all their information close to their chest just for what they think is job security, which is actually impeding the progress of the entire organization. And infrastructure as code might be fearful for them because it basically takes that information and that knowledge and it shares it in a way that can be used by everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think just this is a general pervasive theme, and I think this came up in the discussion we had yesterday also, is it's a culture and a mental shift, right? Because you're not thinking of protect my special server that I have the nice knowledge on and all that. It's like we care about our customer. The customer doesn't care about you're the amazing ops guy or you're the guru dev that only knows this piece of code thing super special. It's like he doesn't care. He just wants you to work. Yeah, to work and it to be reliable, right? And so I think like on the internal side of things, it's like just you need to break down those walls and have. I think the infrastructure as code is a great place for ops and dev to come together, and start to help each other out. And it's really cool when you start to see those kind of interactions like change when you have the different kind of mindset.
So you just brought up something there. Yeah. So, and I got asked this the other day: who owns infrastructure as code? Is it the ops team? Is it the dev team? I always say it's more of a combination because the dev knows what they need, but the ops guy knows how best to configure it. So to me, it's a collaborative type of thing. No one really owns that information.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think it should have very much a shared ownership in terms of who's the first one to start to go down the path. That's really hard to say. Like, so in it happened to be that in DevDiv, right, in Visual Studio, we had, as I came to discover through helping our DevOps story, is aka.ms/ our DevOps journey.
Right,
anyway.
and I'll put that in the link too.
Yeah. So, but it turns out that the devs actually were the ones that initially created the infrastructure as code foundation. However, the service engineers, which is, our ops people, they very much understood it, provided input, but the initial person that got it going was the devs, which is a little different. And so this also kind of falls in line with what you think about the systems thinking of can we efficiently go from dev to ops.
Sure.
And so, if you're a developer out there and you're like really frustrated by IT, like, taking forever to like get this thing going, it's like infrastructure as code is an answer. And I would say, maybe find an ops person who's more open and willing to do these kinds of things. That might be the guy who's like heads down and, buried in tickets or whatever.
Fighting fires.
Right?
Exactly.
But starting down this path and letting people know, hey, can we work on this together? Can we define it in a code? And it doesn't have to be you're using public cloud, right? I mean, it could be the first thing might be a DSC script that provisions a VM. Gotcha. Right? It could just be whatever, but that you start to have that working on that kind of thing. Now, that being said, I will say that for some management folks that are out there, right, this is like, what are you doing? Like I've seen this happen in terms of, because if you think about it, think about a traditional organization, right? You're developers, you're out there, you're being goaled with, I need to push my feature faster and all that. And ops guys are like, you have a pile of tickets and you're monitoring stuff and you're
keep the lights on.
And you're keeping the lights on and you may, that once in a while you go through that release cycle and all that. Now,
right.
In order to work on infrastructure as code, that doesn't necessarily fit on either of those metrics for either team. So if dev guy says, hey, I'm going to delay my feature for 2 weeks so I can help on an infrastructure as code template,
that's not going to go
managers
very well.
would be like,
Yeah,
what? Yeah, I need features.
Right.
Give me my new stuff. Right. And the ops guy, it's like, hey, I can't necessarily do that deployment, or my ticket load I have to half, or just I'm blocked out for 2 days to get it done. Right. And certainly there's ways you can make that process go faster, but nonetheless it's going to take somebody's time. Yeah. And so for a management and other folks who don't get the value, they don't get the DevOps and the bigger picture, I see how that can be a problem.
Yeah, but that's always, to me, it always comes down to education. Those individuals have to be educated. They're C-level executives. These are smart people.
Right.
They can get the concept. Someone needs to take the time to explain that we're going to pay a little now for an accelerated velocity later, right? And no one says that to them. They just say, we're going to go implement infrastructure as code. It's going to take 2 weeks. It's like, no. Give me the return on my investment. What's the cost and what's the benefit? You guys are just telling me you're going to go try these weird acronyms I've never heard of before and not even tell me what the benefit is. So I find education is key to understanding, why are we about to delay this feature? Oh, so that next month I can get 5 times the features? I'll pay that cost, right?
Well, yeah,
and a lot of people need to do that.
Well, yeah, and I think that's part of the thing. We're identifying really what are the costs of not having it.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
That's funny, but we've been paying them for so long, we don't even know that we're paying them.
That's right.
Right, and that's the problem. Yeah,
that's
the problem.
Yeah, people don't realize they need it.
Exactly.
And they don't. They say, oh, that's a
I've been doing it this way for 30 years.
That's a infrastructure as code. Well, that's a pipe dream, or that's a fancy, cool little nifty thing.
Exactly.
But
it'll never work here. Our software is too complicated.
It works how it is now. Why are you going to change anything?
Our
like all these,
because they don't see when the pager goes off on the ops guy. They're not there for that, right? And so they don't pay the consequences or see the downside of not having it, because I demanded features and features showed up. So I'm going to demand more features, and more features are going to show up. But there's so much chaos and pain in between those that they're either not privy to, and I hope that's the answer, because I'd hate to think that they're just ignoring the fact that that thing is true, right? So again, it's about educating them on, hey, look, this process is not near as easy as you might think it is.
Right.
We make it look.
And I think that if you're the dev or the ops person who gets it, and you're like, I would love to work on infrastructure as code, but I'm too slammed heads down with work to even get some time to work on this thing, I think your role is to start to document like all the time that you're spending on configuration, problems, that time, how much time did you spend or your team or other people spend because there was a configuration error with the infrastructure? How much time did you spend spinning up that infrastructure, the new thing, or the infrastructure went bad and you're not sure why, and you spent all this time on that. On the dev side, it's how much time are you wasting because you're waiting on a new environment, right? Start to put these things together. You build a case, bring it to your boss. Now you've got business. You've rolled up the pain and put it into numbers, and money that they care about, right?
Exactly. Numbers are king. I remember there was once where I was telling this company, I can't do this. I don't have enough QA. I don't have enough QA. And until I said, I looked all the estimates of QA and all the estimates of dev and said, look, this is how much freaking QA work I have now, and I don't have this many people. And until I had the numbers, they just didn't believe me, right? So it's amazing how doing something like you just described to actually document the pain so that you can then share it in a way that someone else might get it is extremely important. So how has infrastructure as code changed the role of the ops guy? And does the ops guy have to learn new skills? Because I have to be honest, our Azure templates are just JSON. Anyone can do that. A Ruby script to do a recipe inside a Chef, that's not easy. I mean, and I've actually had to do a lot of searching and trying to look for examples. And I'm a developer, and it was like difficult at first. I can't imagine someone who does not come from a development background. I mean, how does that change your role and your muscle memory and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess one thing, I think that there's a misconception that if you're an ops person, you just, all ops people are scared of code and they don't understand it, and it's just like this kryptonite to them. And I would say that's not true. Right?
Perfect.
I would say that's not true. Okay. I've talked to a lot of different IT pros and ops people, even myself included. Right. I mean, I got a CIS degree. I did like 4 semesters of programming. I did well, but I just was like, I don't want to be a pure software developer, right? I'm just like, it's not my thing.
Everyone.
It's not my thing, right? Like, I love the infrastructure. I love that stuff. I think that, but over the years, I've enjoyed PowerShell. I really love Azure RM and the JSON stuff. Sure. Like, so it's different, right? Like, I'd even be more like, I'm really interested in even writing a task for Visual Studio Team Services. Like, that's the kind of thing that like keeps me interested. But start from scratch and write a whole API, like, no. I'll let Donovan do that. Like, that's cool. You can work on that, right? So there's a lot of ops people that get it. They could debug, like, debug stuff. They can follow the flow of code, but they don't want to be sitting there, doing that. And so I think it may not be as jump to some. Now, there are, of course, ops guys who have no skill set in that space.
Right.
And I would say, I mean, we've been beating this message to ops people for a long time. Learn PowerShell.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. I say that to everyone
this is not, way before DevOps even happened, we were like, PowerShell, you need to learn it. Obviously, that's code. You need to automate. Like, we've been preaching the automation message for a long time now. And so for a real ops person, like, this shouldn't be, hopefully, a big step.
Yeah, you're no longer the guy who just racks servers and connects the network. You better be someone who can script, at a minimum, do some scripting, and be comfortable in PowerShell.
Yeah, you as an ops person, to really evolve, you need to be, you need to evolve. If you're the traditional, like what I think everybody stereotypes all the ops people as, is like you're watching monitoring dashboards, you're just fighting fires, and you're maybe, when you deploy stuff, you go through a 50-page doc. Like, if that's where you're living and you haven't evolved beyond that, yeah, you absolutely have to evolve, right?
Gotcha.
You have to help with the automation, right? Like,
Gotcha.
An evolved ops person, somebody helping enable the DevOps practices. You have the special knowledge as an ops person of how things run at scale in production, right? You have an idea of how certain architectures, ideally, are good or bad, right? Like, well, there's that fault-tolerant thing. Yeah, I know that thing sucks and it breaks all the time. Guess what? You are probably the unique one that knows about that, and get on board with infrastructure as code and say, let's define how it should look when you get there. So it's another interesting concept too, right? I think there's dedicated architect roles, right? And that's a whole nother topic. But I think an evolved ops person should start to know more about the architecture if they don't already.
Gotcha.
And even go a little bit deeper in a really true DevOps team where there's an ops person there. They need to understand the actual app that they're supporting at a deeper level. And they don't need to. I think the far extreme where I've seen is a bad case is ops person becomes pure software developer.
Right.
That doesn't need to be that way.
Right.
Like,
right.
I've
seen that when I've gotten some fear from ops guys. When they hear DevOps, they think that we're going to try to automate them out of a job. Yeah. And that's not it. I'm thinking, your job was never to read a 50-page doc on how to deploy my app. That was never your job. What I'm actually trying to do is give you your job back. Let you do what we actually hired you to do. Understand the network, understand the hardware, understand the configuration better than I do as a developer. I don't want to know. To me, it better just be a virtual directory that works. I don't care what you do to make that work. And if infrastructure as code makes your life easier, go for it, right? I don't even care. But I've met a lot of ops guys who are fearful that they're almost slamming the door in DevOps because they're afraid it means automate me out of a job. And I'm like, guys, that is not what we're trying to do. No, that's not what we're trying to do.
Not at all. Not at all. Because
you still have a job to do.
But I tell you what, if you don't get on the automation train,
you might be out of a job.
That's what I'm saying.
I can't be so sure. Yeah, exactly.
If you automate, you're that valuable guy, and you're helping the organization go faster, and there's so much stuff to automate.
Sure.
Right? There's not an end. There really isn't.
Right.
Like automating tests, automating
every time you make an improvement, you should see how you can improve that improvement.
Right.
It's just continuous. You continually improve.
Right. And here's one which I know will get you. Okay. Let's imagine that you have your whole pipeline automated. Are you doing, let's say, automated fault injection?
Yeah.
Crickets, right?
right.
Well,
pen test and all kinds of stuff.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Well, yeah. And so so when I did the keynote a long time ago about no ops does not equal no operations.
Sure.
I went around to different teams inside of Microsoft, and one of the teams I found was the Azure Active Directory service engineer team, so the ops team for them. They had they were, I think, a great example of an evolved ops team. Okay. Right? These guys actually did write fault injection stuff for the Azure Active Directory infrastructure.
Nice.
They made a ton of recommendations to architecture changes for the service. They found bugs with the service, right? That's like a really cool stuff, right?
Exactly.
And as you mentioned, as a dev guy, you're like,
that's not my concern.
Like, I want to code new stuff. I want to see the cool new whiz bang thing.
Yeah.
Like I would think most ops people, myself included, I like really cool things like that, like the infrastructure, like being super fault tolerant. Like, I can kill the database and it's cool. See,
right?
That's fun, right?
And as a developer, I just want to make sure the database is always there, right? Because I program, some of us do, very optimistically, and it's your job to make those optimistic assumptions true, right? That I don't have to worry about putting all this defensive code in if I can rely on you to give me an infrastructure that's going to be there,
right? And even a security type person, right? It's a little different mindset, but it fits into the same boat. Like, okay, well, maybe if you're in the old school security world, you've got these big old long documents for compliance and all these other things, and you're doing these manual audits and changes. Like, well, when you put it into code and you, I've seen examples like cool stuff like where there's a user story that's involved for the whole team that checks for, security flaws, or automate you being a security guy who helps to automate checking for vulnerabilities as the code goes through the pipeline. Like, that's super cool stuff.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. For sure. No, that's awesome. So one other thing I was going to think we'd take some time to talk about is, or show, is some of the cool stuff that we've been doing. So even though we said that the evolved ops guy probably knows some scripting and stuff, we've been doing a lot of stuff here at Microsoft to actually obfuscate, or basically put an abstraction layer on top of all the configuration and all the complication. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a demo of our new Azure tools and one of the plugins that allows us to create those ARM templates without really having to touch JSON ever.
Sure.
Right. So what I can do inside Visual Studio is simply go and decide I want to create a brand new project. And this project would live inside of the solution right alongside the code and the database and everything else that defines this solution for me. And what it's called is an Azure Resource Group. An Azure Resource Group is a logical grouping of all of the resources that I want in Azure that are going to support the application in which I want to deploy. For example, if I wanted to have a web app backed by SQL, I could go ahead and select this template. I'm going to scroll down and just let you see some of the other templates we have available to you. Now, this template list isn't all that you can do. It's just those that we've actually packaged up to make them a little bit easier. But if you're comfortable in JSON, you can definitely go right down into the JSON and actually change it however you want. the JSON is actually stored in these template folders. And as you can see, it's just normal JSON, but don't worry, you don't have to touch any of this. You can actually come over here to the JSON outline and have a graphical representation of all of the different files that make up your template. And if I wanted to add things to it, let's say, for example, we wanted to add a Windows server to do some type of image compression to turn big images into thumbnails, what I can do is I can jump over here to the template and choose a Windows virtual machine. And what's really nice is that it makes sure that I have everything that I need to create a valid template. So as you can see here, I'm going to go ahead and call this my app server. And then I'm going to go back and it says I need to select a storage account, which I don't have any. So it's going to actually have me create a storage account. And I'm going to go ahead and just call this store. And now it's going to have me go back and say, well, I also need a virtual network. That's no problem. I'm going to go ahead and create one of those and just call it VNet. And now when I come back, it says now I have everything I need to be able to add that Windows server. So now this is why I always distinguish between infrastructure's code and config as code, because right now, as David mentioned earlier, if I were to just run this right now, it would just be an arbitrary Windows machine. It wouldn't have IIS installed on it. It wouldn't have the right version of the .NET framework. It possibly wouldn't have the right ports open. But what I can do is add yet another resource, and this resource is actually going to be the resource that is called a desired state configuration extension. And what it's going to do here is I'm simply going to give it a name. I'm going to want to install IIS. And I'm going to go ahead and click on add. Now what this is going to do for me is a couple things. Add that resource, but also add the desired state configuration script for me. This is an example script for desired state configuration. And all I have to do now is choose which portions of this script I might actually want to run. Because right now all of this is actually commented out. So what I'm going to do is simply take this portion here that says I would like it to be a Windows server. I'm going to cut that from here. Simply paste it outside of that comment, and now I actually have a template that will spin up an Azure web app for me, also spin up a SQL server and even a Windows server, and then run this DSC script against it, making sure that we've actually configured it successfully so that we can use it as a web server. We can then take this project, which would be inside of our solution with the rest of our projects, and just check it into source control and then give it to release management or even to our build system, and those templates can be used to automatically spin up your environment.
I mean, I love the editing experience for Azure RM. I mean, it makes it super easy, even if you're the ops person out there that doesn't know anything about JSON or Azure RM, or you may even be only super light on your scripting skills or not at all. It's really not that hard to get started, right? As you can see, you make some clicks, the infrastructure is there, it's in code. JSON is not like some cryptic language, it's like human readable. You know, you'll find as you get going with things, I think it's actually kind of fun. It's like, hey, I want a new storage account. Couple lines. That's fun, right?
Absolutely.
You know, so yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah.
Awesome.
And then I should also make sure we call out the fact that, you know, the Visual Studio experience has some predefined templates, but if you go to the Azure template gallery, which is also connected up in GitHub,
yep.
You can submit your own templates that you find, and there's a lot of other samples from Microsoft and non-Microsoft people that are there to help you maybe jumpstart your kind of editing authoring experience.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So David, I want to thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me today. It's always a blast whenever we get a chance to do this stuff.
It's good fun.
So where can people find more about you?
Yeah, so for me, my Twitter handle is @DTZAR, and my blog is itproguy.com. And you know, another good resource that I know we've been talking about, kind of relevant to this whole discussion, is the first episode of DevOps Dimension. We interview the people who are in the Visual Studio, DevDiv team, and they have been kind of in pre-DevOps and DevOps teams for a ops person, which we call service engineer, and a software engineer, and kind of how that dynamic works, how the role has changed. You know, some of these topics came up, but we really dig into that and the impact and what it looks like. So you as an ops person should not be scared. You kind of have an idea of some ideas of what it might look like, right?
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I really do appreciate you coming, and until next time, guys, thanks a lot. See ya.
See ya.
Good morning, everyone. Let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Perfect.